Kira sees big green swirling spots the size of Albanian melons. Damar teaches Zial a trick, and Dukat is no longer the chief military advisor of the Tapa Consul. His mother disowned him. His wife took his children, and she left. Hello, and welcome to the 7th row of Cirroc Lofton.
Hello, hello.
We are joined by a very special guest, Dr. Una McCormack.
Hi there.
My name is Ryan T. Husk. I'm just glad we got through that beginning. It took me 2 other tries. There's some tongue twisters in there. I don't even know if I said it right. We are doing a review of Deep Space Nine's Return to Grace, directed by Jonathan West, written by Hans Beimler, and the story is by, I think, a new person, Tim Benko, or Tom Benko. Do we know who that is? Have we seen him before?
No, just 20 minutes before I came on here, I looked him up thinking, I'd never seen that name before. And it turns out he's the only person to have done something like written, directed, and edited an episode of Star Trek.
Edited,
so
you're right.
He's like a really interesting guy. Yeah.
So,
which I didn't know. I didn't know, and I should do. I should know that kind of thing.
Yeah, he's edited 58 episodes of Voyager, 16 of Deep Space Nine, and 40 episodes of Next Generation. His name is Tom Benko. You're right. That is very good trivia. And he directed 2 episodes of Next Generation, and he wrote 2 episodes of Deep Space Nine, Return to Grace, and one we actually did a little while ago, The House of Quark.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
See, I shouldn't have said I looked that up 20 minutes ago. I should have been really smooth about it. I think, gentlemen, actually, you're fine.
If you look him up, you'll see that.
If you look him up like I did 20 minutes ago, yeah.
So Una here, for those that aren't familiar, is quite familiar with Cardassian lore and Deep Space Nine lore. She is a writer. She's written a good amount of books, several of them. I'd say, what was it, like 8 or 10?
Oh, yeah, crumbs. I've lost track now. But coming up for a dozen Star Trek novels, quite a few Doctor Who novels as well. So, yeah, the word they start using is veteran. And then you think, oh, right, okay, I need to oil my joints.
Right. So we'll talk a little bit more about that a little later. She's also written, I believe it was the 4th book of Discovery and the 1st novel of Picard. So very well versed, and she's a Cardassian expert. And this is an awesome Cardassian episode. It's kind of like a Kira episode, but you know. So let's talk about it, shall we?
We shall.
Go.
Albanian.
So Cirroc and I have a little thing that we've noticed that in Star Trek, whenever they're describing something, it's always something that ends in an IAN and then something that's familiar to us, like a Luvanian rat or an Albanian...
Incarian wool, that's one that comes off the top of my head. Yeah, it's ridiculous, isn't it? You think, how is that different? And it's the kind of trick you do as a writer to go, oh, I'm really, really stuck. I need to make it feel a bit alien, but I'm feeling quite tired today. So let me get my random syllable generator. Bing, 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 and then put fish or, or something at the end of it. Shh, that's a writer's trick, you now know. But you're absolutely right. Baldarian slugs or something like that.
Yeah, Baldarian dung beetle.
Exactly that. So, or the other thing to do is to take an ordinary word and just stick a colour in front of it, like silverfish or, that kind of thing. Gold petals. So,
do we ever see the planets that when they mention these places? Like, are these places just completely like abstract, like Albanian? Have we ever seen the Albanians?
Well, I think it takes us until season 3 to see Cardassia Prime. So I'm not holding out much hope for the Albanians, to be honest. And if we did, I suspect it would look very, very, very like quite a harsh piece of terrain, slightly outside Los Angeles. So we'd be suspicious.
Right. With plenty of melons growing around.
Exactly that. Yeah.
Yeah. they do always kind of shoot some kind of crazy planet, but you could definitely see like the Hollywood Hills in the background. And you're like, oh, I think that's Malibu.
Yeah.
No, it's not. It's the Bolian Commissary.
Yeah, the Bolian. That's another one. Yeah, Bolian ants or something like that.
Right. So
this episode, real quick, I was going to just say before you get into there, Ryan, was directed by Jonathan West. I don't want to forget. And Jonathan was our, I want to say he was our DP on the show for many years after Marvin Rush left in the second, third season, I think, to do Voyager.
I think you mentioned that, yeah.
This might have been, if I'm not mistaken, Jonathan's directorial debut on DS9, because he was always there behind the camera and setting up shots, but you'll see him. He appears in the documentary as well, talking about his experience. But I just wanted to give a shout out to his directing this episode.
Wow, he was the DP in 118 episodes. That's more than 2/3 of the episodes, and 47 episodes in The Next Generation. 47 is the magical number, we all know, so that's pretty cool. And he's actually directed 6 episodes of Deep Space Nine, so we'll be hearing his name a little bit more. He directed Shakar, which we all remember, and this one, and then a few more coming up. Cool.
Yes. Yeah.
So we did, speaking of Shakar, Una, on this show, we like to mention the non-appearance mentions, which is somebody that their name is mentioned or they're talked about, but they're not actually in this episode. It's kind of like a credit that goes, lost. And everybody was talking about how Shakar is only in 3 episodes, but he feels like he's in more. So we surmise that he must get a lot of non-appearance mentions, and he did today, his first non-appearance.
Is he really only in 3 episodes?
See?
I'm amazed. Yeah. That's incredible. Yeah, that's wow, I'm a bit surprised about that. I would, if you'd asked me to guess, I would have said 10. I would have. But now you say it, I think, well, actually, no, we don't. We don't see him that much. It's one of the things the show's so clever at, that, and why I think people really like the show. Is this sense that you're not just seeing maybe half a dozen people once a week. There's something living and breathing going on behind it. That promenade feels inhabited. You're kind of going, well, I know that the florist is there. We just haven't met them yet. Yeah. And that's exactly, it's just really, really clever. And I think it touches on one of the things I was just saying before, that we don't see Cardassia Prime. I don't think they technically visit the planet until something like season 3. But we have a real sense of what it's like and how it feels. And they do that in this episode, I think. Those opening, Kira's seeing these Alvanium melon-sized spots because there's a breakdown in public health. So just these throwaway lines, you've suddenly got this whole planet sketched. It's really, really nifty world building. And they do it with characters. I'm amazed he's only in 3. That's great. That's a really good fact.
Yeah. And just to piggyback up what you said, what they also do with the character building is kind of revisit storylines that they established early on. For example, we had in this episode kind of a bringing back of the story of Dukat and his daughter, and how that interaction played out with Kira in the beginning when she first learned about it. And you see how that it's affected him to this day. You also see kind of a carry-on of the flirtation between Dukat and Kira. So I love the way they extend these stories and kind of blend them in throughout the season. So you're never really losing touch with what's up to date with each character.
Yeah, and they do you the credit, the viewer, to say, okay, we'll go. Maybe you didn't catch that one, but we'll bring you up to speed pretty quickly. All we need is a line of dialogue to give you that context, and then you can do the work and imagine the rest of that. Or if you've seen that episode, you'll go, oh wow, yeah, I remembered that, and it's a reward to you that you were there and you saw this play out. And again, it's one of the great attractions of the show, because I think, as we all know, science fiction wasn't really serialized, so right. That's what makes it so special, I think. But yeah, just this sense of a deep world that's going on behind, a really rich story world. just always makes DS9 so enjoyable, I think.
Mm-hmm. And they keep the story going even when the characters aren't there. They just give us one sentence about, Shakar is doing this, or, we know that it's not just a one-off thing, that, the more they mention that person, that character is getting developed, whether we see them or not. I do wonder if they ever mentioned that to the actors. I feel like maybe they didn't, but I feel like it would have been a service to the actors when they do come back to say, by the way, you've been mentioned 3 other times since then, and here's what what they've said about you. That could help the actor kind of play that character a little bit better, I would think.
Yeah.
I can just say from my own experience, guest starring on TV shows, sometimes you're in a position where you don't know anything about what's going on as an actor. So you're walking into it. I don't even know who's the star of the show, or like I sometimes you don't even know. You've never watched a show. You don't know who the stars. You don't know who the regulars are. You don't know where they are in the arc of any kind of storyline. So you're literally just walking in, saying your lines, doing your thing, and leaving. So I think Duncan kind of referred to that.
Right. Yeah, I was just going to say that.
Yeah. So there is a little bit of kind of feeling your way around when you get onto the set and try to fill out, what's the hierarchy and how everything kind of functions. But I have been in a position where I had no idea what the show's about, or I had a very general idea of what the show's about. Like, this is a show about aliens. That's about all I know.
That's the best you get. Yeah. For those of you that also maybe this is your first time watching this show, we'll catch up to speed. Last week we had Duncan Regehr on, who played Shakar, and he said that he was on set and everybody was saying, "Oh, the emissary's come," and the emissary, and he kept like looking around, going like, and finally he says, who's the emissary? And I forgot. I think he said it was Renee, maybe, that whispered. He's like, "Oh, that's Avery." Oh, okay, but that's what it is. Nobody tells you what's going on. You just expect you.
And of course, they're going to assume that the First Minister of Bajor knows that, and it's Bajor. Which that Bajor. Okay.
I had a question for you, Una. As I was watching this, one of the things that came across my mind was the orders that Dukat got from headquarters when he called back. He thought he was going to get a positive response and be elevated to this hero-like status, but instead he was ordered kind of to stand down and not. And my question basically is that consistent with what you think Cardassians would do in such a situation?
I think in this case it is, because I think what they're doing, this thing that we're talking about sketching a world very, very lightly. They do a lot of this work up front where they tell you, we know there's this ongoing war, but right up front they dramatize it through this kind of jokey scene almost with Kira. We know that there's this kind of collapse going on back at Cardassia. We know there's been a change of regime. You've got a civilian instead of a military government. And you know that really they're kind of in decline. They've got, outbreaks of plague and infrastructure's crumbling. It all sounds very familiar. So I do think it's plausible. I wrote a novel actually, which kind of tracks all this. It's kind of set on Cardassia. It tracks all this period from quite early in the show to after the show ends. And you kind of have to piece it together from all these little throwaway lines, like you're kind of catching a line here or a line there. And it's actually pretty consistent. You watch this sort of decline of an imperial power as they pull out of Bajor, and then the military kind of implode and a civilian government takes over, but they can't quite hold it together. And then we're okay going into spoilers, aren't we? We're not working under assumption.
Oh, absolutely. And this is the Lotus Flower, right, that you're talking about?
This is another novel called The Never-Ending Sacrifice. It kind of tracks Cardassia's history. Okay. There's an episode earlier on, a much earlier episode about a little boy called Rugal, who's brought up on Bajor, but he's a Cardassian boy. Mm-hmm. And they send him back to Cardassia at the end of it. It's his story, and we follow him through the Dominion War and all these sorts of things, and you see kind of the collapse of Cardassia. So I had loads of fun. I just was taking these throwaway lines and kind of piecing them together. But it is pretty consistent. You just see this sort of decline. And then as it kind of, you've got all these outbreaks of plague and they're not holding it together. What's the kind of thing you get next? You get a strong man who says, "Let's make Cardassia great again." And that's Gulda Cat bringing in the Dominion army. So it's all real credit to the writers here, because it's all very subtly woven in, but you have a real sense that they know what Cardassia's story is going to be, and it's going to be this collapse into a military dictatorship and an occupation at the end, of course, which is kind of the natural. You kind of start with the end of the occupation of Bajor and you finish with the occupation of Cardassia. It's all beautifully done. But you have to kind of, it's almost like you need to be commissioned to write a novel about it, to sit and piece all this stuff together. But don't worry, I've done it for you.
Did you?
It does work. Yeah.
It sounds the right person now.
Yeah, it sounds like you really did your homework. Did you get all of that information from other novels or just from what's on screen?
That one I mostly did from what's on screen. I mean, I watched DS9 for pleasure and rewatch it for pleasure, and then somebody comes along and says, "Could you do this for money?" And you kind of go, "Yeah, that would be amazing. That would be fantastic." So you kind of get to sit and have to take notes, and it's real kind of geeky fun. You kind of sit there with your spreadsheet and the dates and where characters are and all this. It's classic world building that any writer would do. But all these little mentions you sort of try and weave together into a consistent story, and you build up a picture of what this world must have been like just as it's all falling apart. They can't get the vaccines out in time, or the water isn't clean, or the tram system isn't working anymore. But at the same time, you've got all the kind of elite having expensive dinners and this kind of thing. It all rings a lot of bells. Deep
Space Nine always does.
It really does. It's declining imperial powers are the same whether they're in space or not, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, since we're on the topic of your novels, of which there are several we mentioned, let's talk about very quickly. You wrote the first novel of Star Trek Picard. That's as right, well. Yeah. And I feel like that's just got to be such an amazing situation. But I can't tell if it's like super restricted, because it's like their very first novel. And so they're like, okay, it has to be this. It has to be this. Don't say this. Don't say this. Don't say this. Or if they just say, you've written a bunch of books. You're good at this. Go nuts.
No, it wasn't like that. It wasn't like that at all. No, because obviously this was a really significant show. It was a huge deal. Patrick Stewart coming back. It was a real. There was I'm sure you remember. There's such a big buzz around it. Mm-hmm. So it felt like a really, you're kind of being entrusted with something that people were lavishing a lot of love and attention and investment into. And it was an absolute blast. It was just so much fun from start to finish. I was getting scripts as they were coming through, so I was kind of getting the scripts and revisions of scripts. Right. Everything under a very tight NDA, non-disclosure, and that kind of thing. To the extent that when the first episode goes out, you're sitting there going, "I'm not sure people should be watching this." That's how kind of strict it all feels. People watching this, that can't be right. So you're getting all these scripts and just immersing yourself in this storytelling. I was lucky that the novel is a prequel novel, so it tells the story of why Picard resigns from Starfleet. So I was that meant that I wasn't going to be affected by stuff that happened towards the end of the show, but I had to be kind of consistent with glimpses that we saw of. We do see him going into his resignation meeting, and we're picking up characters like Raffi who are in the show. We see some of her earlier story, but again, you're doing a similar thing to what I was doing with Never-Ending Sacrifice. You're sort of piecing together what you know from over here and turning that into a kind of consistent but fully fledged story over here. So it's great fun. It's a kind of storytelling as jigsaw puzzle as well, and trying to get tone and character right. So it's just a blast. It's a great way to spend the day.
Seems like it.
Yeah, good fun.
My question, actually, really quickly to follow up on that was, when you're giving those parameters, how much of it is your own creative, and how much is it like you have to tell this story?
Well, what I did in this case was I worked very closely with Kirsten Beyer, who's the co-creator of Picard and has written for Discovery and so forth. And Kirsten had been a Star Trek novelist. She's written a lot of Voyager novels. That's what she was doing before she moved into TV writing. So she really knows what that process is like, and she and I get on extremely well. We're sort of very simpatico in kind of stories we want to tell and the kind of character work we like doing. So we had a couple of sort of transatlantic calls where we sort of sat and thrashed through what we wanted to do. And then I just had the freedom to go off it, everything down to that was kind of broad strokes of the story, which is very common for TV writing. You're going to be writing collaboratively, and then somebody goes off and writes a first draft of the script. That meant I went off and wrote, the novel, which is about 100,000 words. But within that, I had pretty much freedom to, what the scenes were going to look like, the kind of rise and fall. So there are constraints, but they always feel collaborative. They never feel like they're closure. They always feel like they're generating. You're working with someone to generate better story. And that's what TV time writing's like. You don't feel it like constraint. You feel it like collaboration. So that's why I enjoy it.
Wow. I do have a question, my little nerd heart in me has a major question that I'd like to ask you about the Deep Space Nine books you've written, but I'm wondering if we have enough time to talk about it. We may have to hold it until after the other side of the break. Sure. What do you think, Cirroc? I know.
That's a great teaser. I think you broke it now, so we might as well.
Ask and cuts, yeah.
One thing to mention, though, absolutely everybody at home, make sure to go to our Patreon page. That's patreon.com/the7th-rule. Then you can join us and be part of our free-for-alls at the end of every episode. You can get all the footage before everybody else does, all kinds of stuff. Cirroc will come over and cook you scrambled eggs. We've got like the coolest things. Patreon.com/the7th-rule. What are you going to say now, Cirroc?
I mean, I do have a world famous egg chef game. So
really,
it is known.
Damn, I could go for some eggs right now.
Yeah, bring those eggs to Cambridge. I'd eat those eggs. I love eggs.
I might have to do that.
What kind of eggs are we talking about?
I do them any which way. But my recipe and my own signature is the scrambled cheese eggs.
Yeah.
Wow. See, I thought you were going to say something like, they're Aldavian eggs.
Yeah, Cirroc's famous Aldavian mud eggs.
yes, the Valerian green eggs and ham. No, right. I have a really good chef game when it comes to breakfast only.
Oh,
yeah. All right.
It's breakfast that counts. Breakfast and steak. Yeah.
Exactly.
All right. So we will take a break. I'm hungry, and we'll be right back on the 7th Rule.